Hello, welcome to Overcome with Travis White, a place for you to share your mental health stories. Tonight I'm speaking with Weston Brandon. Weston is a speaker, author, and songwriter who equips people to guarantee their success through his drive framework. After losing his first wife just 2 weeks after their son was born, Weston rebuilt his life from the ground up, overcoming grief, single fatherhood, and a complete career reinvention. Weston, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, the pleasure's all mine. I'm excited to be able to speak with you, and I think we're going to have a great conversation and be able to help some people out here. So, without wasting any time on my end, I'm just going to turn the microphone over to you.
Cool. Yeah, I when I saw we matched there on Podmatch to connect on this podcast. I looked into the podcast a little bit, what you talked about. I don't know why I didn't connect that you were in Utah when I did a little bit of digging
Mm-hmm.
around. I'm like, I'm in you. Like, it turns out we're like 40 minutes from each other,
Yeah,
And but yeah, I think mental health, especially for men, is not talked about enough. You know, and I one of the things that I do now to volunteer to try to give back towards the mental health space and suicide prevention and those kinds of things is have you heard of the I Love You Bro project?
yes. You're part of that?
I'm one of the group leaders for I Love You Bro
No
project. Yeah.
way. I
Yep.
have
So I
wanted
help
to.
run the group out here in Tooele.
I have been wanting to go to one of those for the longest time.
Dude,
Like,
do it.
I might have
The
to.
closest one to you would be in Lehigh there at Cora Wellness is right in
Yeah,
Thanksgiving Point of the mountain
maybe
there.
maybe I'll just take a trip and drive to Twilla though.
Yeah, I mean, technically the Tooele group is happening right now.
Is
I
it you're missing
bounced
it?
on tonight's meeting to do this interview right now.
Well,
They're having it right now.
well, thank you for making my podcast a priority. I
Yeah,
appreciate
no
it.
problem. But yeah, Lehigh's on Wednesday, so go to that one. And the guy that founded it, Joe Tuiana, he runs the Lehigh group. So you'd meet him, and the Lehigh group's awesome. It's one of the bigger ones. But
That's
yeah, that's what
awesome.
I do is to kind of volunteer to just give space for men to just talk about, what's going on, the things that are heavy and share wins because I think as men, we talk to our families, we talk to our spouses, which obviously we should. Those are great things. But men also, I think, need a little bit of a tribe of other men where they can talk about the same things, but the other men who have the same responsibilities as them are going to get it from that type of perspective, and that I think that's needed. To to be in a space where you can say the things that you would never say to your wife or things that you might not ever say with your children in the room, just in the way that you talk about those things with other men is different. So that's why we do that. And I wanted to throw that out there. So if there's anybody in Utah that feels like they're just lonely, if there's any guys out there that are having a rough go and feeling like I don't I don't have anybody to talk about this with, and I can't afford therapy, can't do those kinds of things. Like I Love You Bro Project, that's what that's for. That's why we do what we do. So I wanted to
And
give that plug right at the start.
yeah, that's really cool because I think it's important to have that space. Like you said, we can talk to our wives or whatever, but like you do talk to I talk to my friend like sometimes way different than I'm gonna talk to my wife. And not that she
Yeah.
doesn't know everything about me, it's just a little bit different.
Yeah, and it's not like you're hiding anything from your
No,
wife either. Like you
exactly.
would still tell her the same things, and I would say the same thing about women. Like they can talk to their husband, but it's going to be a different experience than talking to their sister or talking to some other woman that they're really good friends with or something like. There's just a different connection there because probably the mentality or the biology, they understand the hormones that they're dealing with and we
Hmm.
understand the ones that we're dealing with, so it's a unique situation. And I got into that because for years after, I mean, you mentioned right at the start of the show that I lost my wife when I was 23 and she had just given birth to my son a couple weeks previous to that. And he was born super early at like 26 weeks. Right. And I was actually living in Dallas at the time. I'd moved down there for work. And so I was away from family, away from pretty much everybody. My in-laws were down there for a little bit. For all intents and purposes, I felt very alone down there and ended up coming back to Utah and moving back in with my family. And I'm now remarried, have a couple more kids. Actually, this background here for when I do my podcast, that's a picture of my first wife right there, Lauren, and her
That's
organ
cool.
donor badge and a little figurine of that somebody bought us. And then our mission plaques, you mentioned the church,
Yeah.
my mission plaques right there. And this painting was my first wife's favorite painting of Jesus. We were broke kids and we couldn't afford a painting. So when I got a little bit of life insurance, it wasn't a lot. It was like a year's worth of her salary. That was the first thing that I got, was that painting.
That's cool.
Put that up there. And then my wife I'm married to now, her mission plaque is over here, and pictures you can't see is out of the frame. It's a little over there. But the story is visually told kind of right here. And this credenza is full of photo albums of her when she played college softball. And then there's photo albums of the kids. And it was just the whole family is represented right there. And like, life is good now. Like, you look at that story, like it feels good to look at that, at least for me. Obviously I'm connected to that, but it wasn't like that for a while. For a while it was I hated God. I was so upset with God, and I never wavered in my faith or my belief, but I did not want him to have any involvement in my life for a little while, because I kind of felt like his involvement screwed everything up, and there's all these things going on in my head, and I had to go to therapy for quite a while. I was very lucky when I moved back to Utah that a good family friend of ours that was in our same church ward or same church congregation, he runs and owns New Beginnings Counseling Group. And at the time he was just starting his own practice. It's blown up since then, but he just had me over to his house, and we did therapy in a little office he had in his garage. We had sessions there once a week for a while. And I learned a lot about myself through that process that I now bring to the groups when I lead a group with the I Love You Bro project. Some of those things that I learned about myself was that a lot of the pain, well, I can't say a lot of the pain, but a lot of the really bad thinking patterns that happened through my grief weren't because of the grief necessarily. They were just amplified by the grief. And the grief kind of more broke me open to the point that the old wounds that I had in there already were now kind of brought to the surface, and they were a much bigger issue now in my head than they were before, as they were kind of buried before. Older wounds from childhood or as a teenager, those kinds of things. And had to work through a lot of that and figure out, well, who am I even? How are all these things affecting me?
And how long were you like in Texas alone compared to like the time that you came back to and like had people around you? Because you said
You
that
talking
first
after
part.
my wife passed?
Yeah, I would
It
just
wasn't
imagine
very long.
I was gonna say that's good because that would be tough to be alone in that situation.
Yeah, it was longer than I would like to, just because my son was born at 26 weeks, so he's in the NICU, and I had to wait for him
You got to
to
wait for him to be well enough to leave.
be able to get out of the NICU so that I could do something. And I didn't even decide to move back actually until after I got him home and had him full time at home. We already talked about church, so I'm going to bring that up. I had been working on getting my temple recommend back for a little while and had finally just gotten it back. And I went to the temple there in Dallas for the first time. I hadn't been in the temple probably 2 years. And just because I let work get in the way and all this other stuff, I just didn't make it a priority, And finally I was like, I gotta do this again. And I went to the temple and was praying there. And I remember going in there. I had always gotten direction when I go there with looking for direction, right? And I go to the temple looking for assistance because I feel closer to God there. And this was the first time that I went there that I didn't feel like I got anything. I didn't feel like I gained any other additional clarity. I didn't really feel anything. And so then I was kind of praying again. I'm like, well, thanks for nothing, you big jerk. And like, what's going on? And then the thought occurred to me. It says, why don't you ask your wife what you should do? I was like, can I do that? Like, what? I haven't even considered that. So I was like, I don't even know how to do that. So I more just kind of was still sitting there on that couch praying. And I just asked, I was like, well, babe, what should I do? And immediately I felt this warmth and kind of felt her presence a little bit. And the words hit my mind, go home. And that was when I was like, all right, I guess I'm moving back to Utah, because I was so attached to the life that I had in Texas with my wife and where we had kind of planted our roots, where we wanted our kids to go to school. Like, I didn't want to leave that because I was so attached to her, and it kind of felt like leaving her behind in a way, And so initially in the very first few weeks of my grief, I was like, I ain't ever leaving this house, and I'm going to be a hermit right here, And I was totally fine with that. And until I got my son home and reality started to come back, that I was like, I'm going to have to go back to work. I don't have anybody to watch my kid if I work. Like, what do I do? And that's when I eventually got home. So she passed in April and I moved back late June, early July.
Okay, so that's not like extremely long. With
Yeah, it
your
was a couple months.
son being born 26 weeks, I can imagine he had a little bit of a hospital stay.
Yeah, yeah. He miraculously he didn't have any defects or anything that was really wrong with him. In fact, he didn't even need to be intubated, have the breathing tube down his throat, which was a miracle in and of itself,
That's
being that early. And he just had the CPAP on his nose to
yeah,
give him some pressure to breathe. And we just had to wait for him to hold his own body temperature, hold his own oxygen saturation, and eat as much food as he's supposed to at his size, and
yeah,
hold it down. So once he checked all those boxes, then I took him home. It took him 2.5 months from the time he was born to get to that point, but
yeah.
he did. I brought him home and then we moved back to Utah.
That's crazy though. That's like really, to me, that's the hand of God working right there. The fact that didn't need a breathing tube or anything, that he was like everything was functioning on its
Hmm.
own, just needed CPAP.
Yeah.
That
And
really is like
she was on bed rest in the hospital because the reason that she even had him that early was she was diagnosed with an incompetent cervix, which is actually a medical term. It didn't, the first time I heard that, I was like, that's seriously the
that's
name. Like, what? That sounds judgmental, you know?
yeah.
And, but basically what that is she dilated without going into labor. So the door opens and baby can fall out of there.
Baby can
So
fall
they
out.
put her
Yeah.
on bed rest. They're like, we don't want the baby entering the birth canal right now. He's supposed to stay in the womb. That's where he's supposed to be. And so they put her on bed rest and say, you can't get up at all until the baby comes, because she was just barely too far along to do a cerclage, which where they
Hmm.
stitch the cervix closed. And so they couldn't do that. But then you can't get up or the baby's going to fall through there because you're dilated to like a 7 or whatever she was right at that point. So they gave her some steroids through an IV every day for that week that were specifically made to get his lungs developing faster. So obviously those worked and he didn't need to be intubated. So that was a miracle for sure.
And this may be the most personal question I ask, but
Go for it.
if it's something you don't want to answer, we can move on. I have no problem with it. What was it that like took her away? Like, how did she actually pass? Was there a cause for it?
Yeah. That it was a pulmonary embolism that she developed just from the physical trauma of the C-section that happened, because he ended up coming out
Okay.
breech about a week
Yeah.
later. He was coming out, so they did an emergency C-section. So pregnancy, C-section, bed rest for that long, like all these
It's
factors that kind of
everything
just all
together.
come
Yeah.
together. Yeah. She ended up getting a blood clot in her deep leg veins that ended up getting sucked up to her heart, pumped out to her lungs, and got stuck in her lungs. And then she passed away at home because she was discharged a day or two later after the
Yeah.
delivery. So then for, oh, excuse me, my camera went out.
Nope, you're good.
Get that back on. So for about 2 weeks, we just went up to the hospital after I was done working. So I was working from home because I was closer to the hospital from home than I was the office. And then she just started having episodes where she kind of felt short of breath and she thought she was having some anxiety issues, which, given the context, I didn't
She
question,
yeah,
you
no
know?
doubt.
And yeah, and then eventually one morning she thought she was having another panic attack and just asked me to help her to calm down. And obviously she never caught her breath and she collapsed in my arms there and passed away. And I ended up doing a CPR on her for a while there at home until EMTs showed up and they took over for me and rushed her to the hospital. And then that whole rest of that day was praying and begging for miracles and not getting the miracles I wanted. And then I
Man,
ended up letting her go about 2 o'clock in the morning, like 18 hours later. So
that's tough. That's tough to hear.
it was a rough experience, but I can talk about it now because I've worked through a lot of that, and I can, I'm at a point now where I can think about even the horrific scene that I witnessed when she collapsed and I
Hmm.
was doing CPR and all those things. Like I can go back to that and I can think about that and I can replay that in my mind without having a panic attack, without having like some PTSD callbacks like I initially did when it was still really fresh, because I was able to work with Jason in therapy. We kind of separated the memory from the emotion so that I learned how to control when I allowed that emotion to come in and when I didn't. And the way that we did that was he had me retell what happened as if I was watching it in third person, kind of like I was a drone floating over my
Yeah.
own head. And I was just giving like a police report almost of like everything in the environment, exactly how it went down, like, just giving the play by play of how everything happened, specifically not including any emotions with it. And then he would have me go, and instead of saying anything that happened, he would specifically have me focus only on the emotions of what I'm feeling and only describe the emotions, not what's happening. I learned how to like separate those in my mind. And then through doing that and practicing that, I was able to get to the point where I have a little bit better control over those things now, years down the line.
Yeah. And that takes a lot of work though, to be able to do that type of stuff and to actually talk about a past trauma. Like it's not easy to do. So like I applaud you for being able to work through and separate that, because I don't think everyone can do that.
Yeah. And for sometimes I think I might have even went a little bit, I don't know if I want to say too far with it, but I I also warn people against burying the emotion entirely,
Hmm.
because then you're just like numb to it. Like it then becomes very hard to feel the emotion. And that's actually something that I have to work on, because I go on podcasts, because I go and speak, because I share the story a lot more than I used to. I don't bring in the super heavy emotion and end up, bawling my eyes out. And I tell the story a lot more without that level of emotion. And sometimes I have to purposely go back in my own time and think about it and purposely bring that emotion back so I can maintain the emotional and spiritual connection to the story, so I can still tell it
Yeah.
authentically, because there does come a time when I've told it on a podcast 4, 5, 6 times in a row, and I can feel I'm like, I'm disconnected from this
It's
now. I'm
too
kind
much
of almost
separation. Yeah.
disassociated. Yeah, there's too much separation here. I need to I need to take a break telling the story on podcast, because it's getting too saturated, I guess, with the story. And I need to take some time and go up in the trees and think about it, and purposely, I don't know if I want to say like I need to go purposely hurt, but like I need to go reconnect with my emotions again, so I'm not just a robot about it. And that's I I I haven't figured out a balance for that. I I don't. I kind of swing both ways.
I would say I wouldn't think there would be much of a balance for that, to be honest. Like, I think it'd be so much, like you said, swinging back and forth. It's like there's like not quite the middle ground, it
Yeah.
seems like.
And I usually err on the side of less emotion, because when I'm trying to talk about it with somebody, I'm trying to have a realistic conversation about how I can help them, you know.
Yeah.
And usually they're the ones getting emotional about something when they hear the stories. I'm like, if we're both bawling our eyes out, I don't know how much that's helping us.
Right.
I don't know. Like I said, I'm not saying I know how to do that perfectly. I'm not even giving advice there. That's just been my experience.
So I want to kind of go to men's mental health here. So, with your experience with grief, what are the most common ways you would say that grief silently sabotages men's mental health?
Well, grief gets buried because we have so many overwhelming responsibilities. I guess I can't say overwhelming in general, because we all have the responsibility to be providers and protectors for our families. That's our role. That's our masculine responsibility. But when you're in grief, all of those other responsibilities become overwhelming, because you feel like you've kind of been cut off at the knees, and that the grief is taking so much of your energy to just even be present with, that you don't have much energy to healthily deal with the other stress in life. So it just makes everything else harder to so much harder to actually give space for, I guess. I don't know the right way to say that, but when I found, for me, I experienced this, and other people in grief, sometimes the little things will just push you a little bit over to the edge, where you feel like you're starting to lose control of the emotion. You start to spiral a little bit, and you have to remove yourself a little bit and kind of gather yourself a little bit. So even just a conversation at the dinner table on Thanksgiving or something, that a particular topic's brought up, and it might not even be related to your grief at all. It might not even be talking about the person you lost, but it brings up something else that's causing just a little bit of anxiety or stress on you, and your ability to handle stress has already been sapped because the grief has been so heavy that day. Then that little thing, you're like, I'm out, dude. I can't. And you're like, if I'm not going to start crying in front of everybody, or if I'm not going to get pissed and start punching walls in front of everybody, I need to leave. And that at least that's been my experience. And so all of the other stuff just gets harder to deal with because you don't have as much capacity to deal with those stuff because the grief is taking up so much of that capacity.
Yeah, yeah. I can imagine. Try to think of my own experiences. I haven't experienced grief in the sort that you have, but it's all just rough. Like I just life's rough in general.
Yeah. I mean, men's mental health in general, I am very happy that lately, the past probably 2 or 3 years, the pendulum has started to come back, that people have been paying more attention to men's mental health and acknowledging that it's a conversation that needs to be had, you know? Whereas I think for years and years, it was focused way more on women, and men just weren't talked about. And men were expected to sacrifice everything for the
Hmm.
well being of women, which, not saying that we shouldn't sacrifice for the well-being of
Yeah,
women, but not to our own detriment. You know what I mean? Like, we still have to
yeah,
be equal partners in our relationships. And I think for a while, just as a culture, we swung too far one way. And now it's coming back to a little bit more of an equilibrium that I think is healthy. Like, because of people like Joe that do the I Love You Bro project, and so many more podcasts like your own, that's it's becoming more normal to have those conversations. I don't think we're there yet, but we're getting closer.
yeah, yeah. And I've had a lot of more people on my podcast lately that are opening up and saying, mentioning specifically mentioning men's mental health and how it is on the rise, and it's exactly what we need in this day and age because I feel like we have this whole new generation of the young adults that are going through a lot of garbage right now and they don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah. Um, I'm glad you mentioned young adults, because that's where I personally feel called to focus on, to put effort into helping that demographic, I guess. And that's why I go around speaking to high schools. And I've been to Lincoln Memorial University talking to veterinary science students, of all people. I'm not a vet, but they paid
Yeah.
me to go out there, you know, because anxiety was very prevalent with those particular students. They were getting ready to go out into a very high stress and also high performance career of being veterinarians, that making good money, but also having a lot of weight on them to run a practice or to take over practice. So there's business skills they had, like all this other stuff was like just like a lot of anxiety on them. Kind of felt like they were standing on the edge of a cliff and they were going to get pushed off the edge of it, whether they liked it or not, once they graduated. And so that's why they brought me out there, because that's what I talk about is, what do you do when life has you on the edge of a cliff and you don't have a choice but to either fall off the edge of it or jump off the edge of it. Like, you cannot go back. And that's also why it resonates. Like, I do a graduation speech at a high school, because a lot of those kids getting ready for college, like, they've been riding kind of a conveyor belt up to the edge of this cliff, and that conveyor belt isn't slowing down. They're gonna either fall off the edge of it or they can jump far.
Hmm.
That's usually what my theme when I do a graduation speech is: jump far. I'm like, you're going off the edge anyways. You might as well jump as far as you can go.
Yeah.
And I have other things that I talk about in that as well. But the young adults in particular, I was doing some studies. There have been some national research studies. The past 4 or 5 years, there was one in particular done by Harvard that talked about how having a clear sense of purpose directly correlates to not only the mental health, but the performance of students in college. And like, I think of that, and I personally think, well, no duh, you know,
Hmm.
but then I go to so many schools and there's so many students that don't have a sense of purpose, because they've just been going through, I guess, the motions of school. And I look back at myself when I was a senior in high school, and I'm like, honestly, I wasn't a whole lot different. Like I knew we were talking about the Latter-day Saint perspective. I knew I was going on a mission. That's the only thing that I had in my head. Like I didn't know what I was doing after that. So for me, it was more like coming home from my mission. And now it's like, well, I think I'm supposed to get married, right? So I guess that's the next thing I focus on. Or I'm supposed to go to
Mhm.
college. I don't really know what for. I ended up going for sales because I figured if I could sell Jesus, I could sell whatever you're selling. And that led into my sales career. And, I just kind of figured it out and winged it. But everybody in these at these schools is, I can't say everybody, but a lot of the students, the behavior issues that are coming, the aimlessness and the lack of purpose and lack of vision really is so much worse than it used to be. In fact, I mentioned some of the other studies. I think I might be thinking of the wrong one, but there was one done by Gallup that I was reading about the effectiveness of hiring speakers to come to schools to do assemblies and how it used to be super effective 10 years ago and they would see huge shifts. And now it's nowhere near as effective. That they still do it and they still see impact for, maybe a week after the assembly. They still have kids come out of the assembly like, oh my gosh, that changed my life or whatever. But then they don't see the needle moving on behavioral issues like they used to. They don't see the needle moving on attendance or engagement in the classroom after an assembly for nearly as long. And I got thinking about that and doing some more asking around when I would go to speak to a school. I'd ask the counselors, I'm like, what do you think is this and this and this? And the best thing that I can boil it down to that I found some additional evidence on was the pandemic that we went through and the lockdowns that we went through. Like think of the stories that we weren't told with direct words,
Mhm.
but the stories that kids learned were now true about the world. Like, hey, your future, even where your day-to-day life, guess what? You don't have a say in that anymore. You don't have control over anything. And you can be all for the COVID lockdowns or you can be absolutely against them. And, whichever side of that aisle of morals that you fell on doesn't matter because no matter what you do on either side of those, you're still locked down. And
Yeah.
when that lockdown comes up is not up
It's
to you.
not up
And
to
it's
you, nope.
completely outside of your control. And then the virtual learning that you do, now you're all isolated and you don't have the human connection with people anymore. So you increase that anxiety. You teach kids that they no longer have control over their own future. And then you separate them from their peers and their mentors and make them work in these little silos at home where all they can do is just scroll on social media all day. And guess what they see on social media during all that time? Everybody arguing about how bad the world is
Bad
right now.
royalties.
So then you get all of these paradigms of belief that the students now believe that I don't have control over anything and it's not really worth it to even try because the government's just going to handle it all or whatever however they interpret what was going on, right? And then
Mhm.
all of a sudden, hey, we're all going to go back to school and expect it to be back to normal, and you wonder why we have so many mental health issues in school. That these kids no longer believe that they can actually accomplish what they want to accomplish.
Yeah. And that take on it, I think makes complete sense because you're taking away their livelihood. Like you
Yeah,
changed everything about it. And it's like some of these kids, like I think of the high schoolers back then, they completely missed out on some of their high school days because we had a shutdown and all this
yeah,
other
like
stuff
the
going on.
class
Yeah.
of I can't remember there was a term for the COVID graduates, the people that never got to walk, never had the graduation ceremony, because it's outside of their control. They never got that. They got their diploma sent to them in the mail and with a letter that said good job.
Yeah.
So everybody else that has pictures and memories of walking down the aisle and going out to dinner with family after and the pictures with everybody and the whole thing with your cap and gowns and throwing your cap up in the air because you accomplished something, like they didn't get any of that. It was almost a message of like, hey, you are less important than whatever else is going on.
Yeah.
You know, like what you want no longer matters. And so that teaches a belief pattern in those kids. And then they go to college and they get into a career and you wonder why when they get any kind of opposition or something looks like it might not work out all super great, their brain like reverts back to the, oh
Mhm.
crap, like I need to protect myself in whatever way I did during that time. And usually people just dissociated with video games or social media or whatever.
Yeah. I think also like what you mentioned, social media could play a huge role into that because what do you do when you're on social media, especially kids? You're comparing yourself to others.
Mm-hmm. And the only things that you see are the things that drive a lot of engagement, which is the
Yep.
extremes of both ends, right? You don't
Yep.
see any
Exactly.
where the 90% of the middle ground where everybody's actually at in life. You see the people that are either absolutely killing it or faking that they're absolutely killing it and making themselves look really, really good, which makes you feel like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah.
I suck because they're doing, that comparison thing that you talk about. Or you see the extremes of the other end where people are just angry and fighting all the time, which I think that's probably more common
That's
because
more
people
true.
get they get an adrenaline rush over fighting online,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you looked at my Instagram before we had this interview or not, but if you do, there's one particular reel I made that's almost 400,000 views now, and it's all it is a carousel saying like, "Hey, this is Lauren, my wife. She passed away when she gave birth to my son. This is our story," and it just quickly goes through like a little timeline of how my life went. Like, I was married here, we went on a honeymoon, moved here, had the baby, she passed away. I moved back to Utah. I met another woman who's really awesome. We got remarried to have more kids. Now life is great. And that's what it is. You read the comment section on that.
I'm sure it's
My
awful. Yeah.
gosh, it's a cesspool of some very angry people that don't like that I moved forward with my life and that I dishonored my first wife, Lauren. Like they don't see this. They don't see this whole
No,
memorial that I have for her back here. And
it's
then
not like,
there's good people too. There's good comments. And I get DMs from people like, oh my gosh, that was so inspiring. This was great. I
yeah. And
sent this to my
it's
friend
clearly,
who's dealing with.
clearly not like you forgot her. Like it's in
Yeah,
order
like the
to,
fact that I'm making this video right now
yes,
is kind of a tribute to her. But
exactly. Like, people are insane to me. And I look through like Instagram comments and stuff. Sometimes I have to stop myself too much because uh, I follow a lot of some of the political stuff that's going on. And I look through those comments. I'm like,
yeah, yeah.
people just like, my question is, I guess I should say this. My question is if I met you in real life, that person in real life, would they say that to my face? I want to say
90% of the
90%
time,
of the
probably
time,
not.
not. Yep.
Yeah, there are still some people who would, and every once in a while, you kind of get a feeling of that person in the comment section. You're like, that might end up in a fist fight if that happened in real life. But
Mm-hmm.
there are those
Exactly.
people for sure. But then you think of these kids, and they're scrolling through the same stuff, but they haven't had near the life experience to give them the I guess the lens with which to look at that through. That especially if they were still in their development years in school during the COVID lockdowns, and that was their only form of communication, right? The rest of us that went through a normal school life or a normal upbringing, years previous, our main method of communication was in person, and then cell phones kind of came around. I'm at the tail end of the millennial group, so I was in high school when cell phones really became smartphones started becoming a thing. So I kind of had the best of both worlds. I still came. I was born with everybody that we passed notes, and then all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden that just went up in smoke because we had smartphones. And now we just text each other and stuff. It's kind of the best of both worlds where we we thrived, we lived on human connection. We always wanted to hang out with our friends. And now all the kids want to do is play online video games with each other. We want to
Mm-hmm.
connect that way, these type of
Yeah.
things. We lose this interpersonal connection and wonder why our mental health
Yeah.
suffers.
Yeah. I think we're pretty close then. Because I don't think I had smartphones until college, but my 6-year-old daughter is always like, it's like I feel like kids now live in this like instant gratification zone that we didn't get when we were kids. Like we had to go outside and play. We didn't have all the, cool technologies that we have today to watch a movie like right off the bat. Like watching a movie was more
Right.
of a almost a luxury. I
Mhm.
don't want to say luxury, but it was like I feel like it was
Took a
what's the
lot
word I
more
want to
effort to put it together
Yes, yes. It's like it was like more of a thing. It's like, okay, well, we need to make sure we pick the movie that we really want to watch. Because now my six
because
year
the
old,
whole family's
yeah,
watching it
the
because
whole
the
family's
TV is
watching because the
occupied.
TV's,
Nobody else
yes,
can do it.
exactly. But my 6-year old's like, well, I want to change movies now. It's like, you have no idea. You have
Everybody's
no
watching a
idea.
different
Yep.
show on a different device, all in the
On a
same
different
room
device.
with
Yep.
their headphones. And yeah, everybody can
So
get what they want
want
when they want
whenever
it.
they want it. Yeah. And they don't understand any different.
Yeah. Because it's not even their fault. It's just how that
The way,
happens. So I
yeah.
think I can't even blame the parents of 'cause I think we're also coming a little bit back from that because those of us that were in school when those things became a thing, we saw those that were children at that time, their parents had never experienced this type of technology and didn't know how it would affect them, didn't know how to regulate it. So it was kind of just, free reign all the time. I'm seeing 7-year-olds with iPhones. And now at least I see from my perspective that parents our age saw how bad that was, and we've
Yeah.
made the same mistakes and saw how bad it was for us when we first got like addicted to it, and now we're like, "Ooh, okay, we need to like pull
Back
the
up.
reins on
Yeah.
this." And
Yep.
so now we see more parents that are like, "Okay, you're not getting a smartphone until you're 16," and or some other, putting more rules on that. I think is a little bit more normal. Like the Gab phones, I see the billboards for the Gab phones all over. Like smart stuff for kids. That wasn't a thing when they first came out. It was just a freaking free for all. You just
Yeah.
throw everybody to the sharks and let them figure it out.
So another thing that I think I mentioned it at the very first, you speak about is the drive framework. I'd love for you to
Mhm.
give more detail on that and how it was born.
Yeah. So it actually is a decent segue into there talking about the young adults and the students because the drive framework was born when I decided that I had value to share in this type of manner, right? Um, I had a particular experience. I never wanted to do speaking. I didn't want to do coaching. I didn't want to do any of that because the career that I transitioned into in the trades, I was making enough money and I was comfortable. And I had a goal in my head of how much money I wanted to reach to where I was like, okay, my wife no longer has to work. And that's like my life's goal. So my wife doesn't have to have a job. I provide all of her needs. And if she wants to go make money doing hobbies like photography or whatever to pay for vacations or something, then she can do that. But that was my big goal. And once I hit that, I was like, okay, I can finally breathe and kind of just, I'm content with this being my life the rest of my life. I'd finally hit that point. And that was a really good feeling for a minute and for about 2 months. And then kind of out of nowhere, I had that it was a very spiritual experience for me to where it was, you need to share this. You need to get this out. And when I had that particular experience, and it was a little bit over the course of a couple of weeks total that real experience was. But when it finally hit me like a semi truck, that's absolutely what I needed to do. I decided to dive right in. I'm like, all right, how do I even do that? So I grew up in a little town called Rush Valley. There's a guy out there. His name's Chad Hymas, if you've heard of him. He's a Hall of Fame speaker, and he's a quadriplegic in a wheelchair. And he had a giant bale of hay fall on his neck and break his neck. I think I was 4 or 5 years old when it happened out there, and it, like I said, paralyzed him. And now, years down the line, he travels the whole world speaking, doing safety conferences for big companies and stuff. And so he's the only guy that I knew that did any kind of speaking. So when I had this kind of thing that I felt like I needed to do, I decided like I'm going to go talk to him, family friend of ours, and just ask him what the heck do I even do with this feeling? How to even do that? And he got me connected with some people that could help, and I ended up going to kind of a little mastermind group that helped people kind of figure out their messaging if they were thinking about speaking. And it was in that group that I decided I was like, I need to figure out a way to package what I'm passionate about talking about and what I feel like I really need to share. And I need to figure out a way to package it in a way that's easy to communicate so that I could even teach it to somebody else and then they could go use the same thing. So it's, I guess, scalable in a way would be a
Hmm.
word to put it. So it's like, all right, how do I even do that? And all the information was coming from life experience before everything happened. I grew up on a cattle ranch, like I said, out in Rush Valley, this little farming town. So there were lessons from that life, and then there were lessons from when I served a mission for a couple of years, and there were lessons from obviously my terrible grief journey, and then the overhauling my whole life after that, and getting into this more blue collar career versus a sales career. Where it really started to stick was in both my sales career. Looking back, I had experiences in there training new hires, training young adults that were trying to figure out a new career. And then the same thing happened in the blue collar field of fixing commercial kitchen equipment. We would hire some new guys, and I was really good at connecting with them and training them. And they learned really well when they were with me. So I kind of became the impromptu trainer for anybody that was new. They'd just send them with me, and I would take them on jobs and train them over the next 8, 9, 12 months. During that training time, I kept having similar experiences where these guys were having trouble assimilating the knowledge that I was trying to impart on them from a technical perspective. Like, we're having to talk about thermodynamics and electricity and magnetism and stuff for the job to be able to troubleshoot equipment. But they were having a hard time remembering a lot of what I'm teaching them. So then I became obsessed with, how do I help these guys remember what the heck I'm talking about? Because I felt like I learned it pretty quick. And as I started getting to know these guys better, I started to recognize that they were wearing masks in a proverbial sense. They were putting on some type of facade when they were with me or when they were at work that wasn't actually authentic to who they really were. And some guys were worse at it than others. And so I started asking them questions, trying to figure out who they actually really are and what they actually really want out of life. And once I was able to help these guys kind of remove the mask and actually get authentic with me and actually have a real human connection with them, then all of a sudden what I was teaching was working. Then they were remembering it because it was actually making it through the mask. It was actually getting to the person underneath the mask, right? And so as I was trying to figure out how do I teach that, those were the experiences that I was drawing the messaging from. The framework itself, Drive, came when I sat down. I was like, how do I figure out how to teach the process of how to overhaul your life that I went through actually a couple times. And I finally came up with Drive in this sense. And the D is discover. And discover could be a 12-sided dice. That could be discover lots of different things. But the most important things are, what are the wounds that you have that are telling you lies about yourself that are then making you put on those masks, right? So like what has happened in your life to teach you a false story about yourself? So that's the most important thing to discover about yourself. So it's really discover what lies you're telling yourself, and then also why are you telling yourself those lies? If you can figure that out, I need to remember to wake up. My camera has a stupid sleep timer on it. But if you can figure out what those lies are, well, now we can go resolve those lies, right? We can resolve some of the things that we need to fix, and that's the R. And then also the kind of the flip side of the coin for resolve is just developing a stronger resolve to continue going. The way that we do that is we invest in ourselves. That's the I. How can I invest more heavily in myself to increase my own value, to increase my own mental health, and just become an overall better person? The way that we figure out where to put those investments and how to invest ourselves is we visualize what it is that we want. And we use that as the lens to make those decisions. So the V is visualize. And when I teach the visualization process, some people call it manifesting or affirmations or something like that. Different terms that people use for it. But it's thinking in an extreme amount of detail exactly what life you want to live. What is the reality that you want to be in? And you think, like, if you close your eyes, like, put yourself physically there, but also emotionally there, and write down, like, if I visualize this was my future, I would write down what the chair feels like that I'm sitting in. I would write down what the room smells like. What does it feel like in here? What else is around me? What does it look like? What color are the lights? What color are the blinds? I try to get really detailed about where I am. And then I would get just as much detailed about how I feel being there inside. Like, what's the peace that I feel and why? Like, am I happy? Why? Like, how does this feel to be here? And then that visualization is the most powerful part, because it then sets the direction for all of the investments that I make in myself. And then the E of the framework is elevate. And this is really the catalyst to making whatever your version of success is, whatever it is you want, your vision, how to make that happen as fast as possible is elevate. And not only elevate yourself, like elevate your thoughts and elevate your environment and all these other things, but do things so make your vision, your version of success, so that your success is elevating the people that you care about. It's elevating your family, it's elevating your friends, it's elevating your community, it's just making everybody else's life better. In fact, the best way to do that is more of a synergistic relationship. If you can find somebody that has similar goals to you, that wants to accomplish very similar things, well, guess what? Now you're a team, and you're going to try your best to elevate each other so you can, progress faster. And as we do that, we just start to attract to ourselves the people, the opportunities, the raw material, whatever else is needed to create the reality, what our vision is, to actually happen in real life. And when I can, I like to take a spiritual lens on this and dive into a little bit of scripture, which I think is appropriate
Yeah.
given some of the things we've already talked about. And since we're in Utah, if you have some LDS listeners, they'll recognize James 1:5. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, right? That's a pretty popular scripture in our culture. But if James is saying, like, if you lack wisdom and you're looking for something in particular, let him ask of God that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. So he says, just ask. But then the next verse, verse 6, is kind of the caveat to that. It's like, you have to do it in this way for it to work. He says, ask in faith, nothing wavering. That nothing wavering part is key. And if that is a condition upon getting the answers that we look for, how do we make sure that we don't waver? Well, the best story that I can tell to illustrate that would be Peter walking on water. Whose idea was it for Peter to walk on water in the first place?
Yeah. Now I can't even remember stories now because I'm baffled by like everything that you just said. The drive method is just like awesome. Like it's like
It's a lot, but
it's
I'll come back to it. When Peter walked on water, it was Peter's idea.
Peter's
If you go
idea.
back and read that story,
Yeah.
because Jesus has just got done having this, teaching and healing people for a while, and then they got appointments on the other side of the sea, basically. They're like, we got to
Mm-hmm.
get over there now. And Jesus is like, I need to recharge my batteries. I'm a little like wiped out here. I'm going to go up to the mountain to pray, and y'all get in the boat and start heading over there. I'll meet you there. It's kind of what he said. And so they get going across the sea, and then the storm comes up, right? It's a boisterous sea, lots of waves, and the apostles they're freaking out. They're like, we might drown. This is kind of nuts. And I don't know why every time they get in a boat on the sea, the storm comes up, and it's like there's 4 different stories of them in a boat in a storm. But this particular one, Jesus is coming across the water. He's walking on water, and they think he's a spirit at first. And John even freaks out. He's like, "Oh my gosh, it's a spirit. We're gonna die." And Jesus calls out to him, and he says, "Be of good cheer. It is I." He's like, "Calm down. Be happy. It's me. You're all right." And then Peter, he says, "If it's you, I want to walk on water." He's like, "Let me come unto thee upon the water." So it's Peter's idea. So Jesus stops. He's like, "You have all the power to do that. Like, I don't even need to help you. Go ahead. Sure, do it." So Peter's like, "Well, if Jesus said I can do it, well, I believe I can do it." So he actually steps out of the boat. That's how we don't waver. We actually step out of the boat. Because if you're in the boat asking, I need to walk on water here, but then you never step out of the boat,
You're not
that's
taking that
wavering.
risk. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not doing it. You're
You're
not
getting
jumping,
stuck. Yeah.
right? You're not exercising faith. So then he steps out of the boat and he starts walking on water until what? He starts to fear. It
Fail.
says that he looked around at the storm and he saw the rough waters and he began to fear,
Fear.
insomuch that he began to sink. So the reason that he walked on water was because he actually believed he could and he didn't waver. And the only way you can prove that you don't waver is you actually act. You actually do it. So his faith made him walk on the water, and Jesus is just like watching it happen, you know? And then he starts walking to Jesus. He takes his eyes off the Lord, looks at something else, and he began to fear. That's the caveat that I always point out. Is like people say, well, it's because he wasn't looking at Jesus. I'm like, no, that's not what the scripture says. It says the reason he didn't fear was because he was looking at Jesus. The reason he sank was because he feared,
Feared.
because he started to doubt. So he began to sink. And then he called out, Lord, save me. Lord grabs his hand, he lifts him up, and then Jesus kind of gives him a burner. He's like, oh, ye of little faith. Like, oof, And so when we first read that story, I think sometimes we think, dude, if walking on water is little faith, then what the heck is my faith? Like, God, mine sucks. But the more that I read that story and prayed about it, I think that Jesus was more saying, not your faith was little. Your faith in this moment, because you're sinking, is little compared to the faith that you just showed, right? So to bring this all back to the drive framework, all I'm doing when I go to a school or I go to a corporation or I go to some nurses association meeting or something, when I'm teaching them drive, all I'm teaching them is how to do what James says, how to actually act in faith and not waver. That's all I'm doing.
That's
But I'm
super
giving them
cool.
a completely different, way to think about it. So I'm going in there. I'm like, the Bible's in my back pocket, basically. I'm teaching scriptural principles here, but I'm doing it in a different lens that it's accepted in a
Yeah.
secular world, right? And because of my background in the trades, I had to study, like I mentioned, thermodynamics and electricity and all this. I bring in a lot of analogies of ways to think about these things on how the world works and use that to tie it in. And I talk about becoming magnetic to attract to us the things that we want to do. And how do we become magnetic? Well, a magnetic field is only generated when a charged particle is in motion. On the molecular level, it's when an electron is actually moving, then then a magnetic field is actually generated. But if no charged particle is in motion, no magnetic field is generated. Now, why that's the case, we don't know. We have no clue why, but we've studied enough that we understand that that's how it works, and we understand how magnetic fields interact with each other. We can harness that power to turn the lights on. That's why we can have this conversation, because we know how magnets work, basically. When we really boil it down, that's why. And so if we understand that that's how the universe works to attract and repel things, because remember, being magnetic, like a magnet doesn't just attract things, it pushes them away too. And I think people are the same way. When we actually have a vision for what we want and we actually move in that direction, even if it's not specifically in that direction, like we don't know exactly where we're going to end up. We don't know sometimes exactly what it is that's really calling to us, but we have a general idea. As long as we are charged with that vision, we're charged with that idea and that faith, right? And we actually move in that direction, well, then guess what? We begin to attract the things that are actually in harmony with that, and we repel the things that are not. We become magnetic. And that's how I talk about it in a secular frame. But all I'm doing is saying, like, this is how you exercise faith, guys. This is how we live
Yeah.
by faith.
So the funny thing is that you brought up faith. I've actually been working with an acronym using the word faith.
Well, nice. What's it?
Because
Let's hear it.
So here's my take on it. Let's see. Long story short, back when I got engaged, I started having seizures really bad and went through some mental health things. I was engaged for a long time, 10 years, about 10 years to be exact. And just because
that's a long time to be engaged.
I couldn't hold down a job, and I was so emotionally unstable, and I didn't realize it for a while. The seizures basically went away. I had migraines for years, had some smaller seizures, maybe like once or twice a year. This last year, they came back full force. I got a different diagnosis, and my mental health just went completely downhill. So every time that this happens, my faith kind of wavers. Like I basically what you said, I start questioning God. Like I've not completely fallen off the bandwagon because obviously I work for the church. So I've brought my way back, but since this last year, I've been toying with this faith method because this is how I got through what I was able to overcome, what I was able to use to overcome what I was going through. So F is for foundation. What are you going to build your foundation on? Like when you're in those dark moments, like when you're going through a crisis or a hardship, like, for me, it's God. Like for somebody else, it might be something else. Like doesn't, I'm trying to disregard religion here to a point, but because
you have to have something.
you have to have something. Yeah. Yeah. It could be a team. It could be your business, like whatever it is. A is for attitude. Do you have the right attitude to go through life? Like I can't remember where I got in life with a bad attitude because it just made me dig myself deeper in a rut. I is for integrity. Are you being honest with yourself? Are you being honest with others? T is for trust. You need to trust in yourself and have that community of others to trust in. Because I think without trusting in yourself, you tend to make poor choices. And once you find that trust within yourself, like you can turn your whole life around. And H is for humility. Are you being humble, showing that side of yourself? Like don't think that you're better than anybody, because to me, nobody's better. We're all equal.
I think that's key what you just said there, the equal thing, because I think too many people, when they talk about humility, they think that they are intentionally putting themselves below other people.
Yeah. And I don't
I
see it
don't
that
think
way.
that's true humility. Yeah. I think humility is acknowledging that you are equal
Yeah.
in also the positive ways, right?
Hmm.
That I am absolutely capable, and you know, it, it's it's possible to do that without having pride. And I think pride is that I am better than
And
God. I
yep.
I don't need God, or I don't, these other things that I have to lean on. Is I think the pride is when you take upon yourself way too much credit,
Hmm.
but not with the humility. You're not casting away your trust and your capability. I think that's why I really like the trust part too, because you can't really trust yourself if you're saying that you're not as good as somebody else
Yep.
and calling it humility, right?
Exactly.
That's just self-sabotage. That's a terrible way to look at it. So I like that a lot. In fact, just today I was thinking while you were talking about that, the faith acronym that you were just talking about was, I bet you I would make can I make an assumption about you real quick? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's totally fine.
I would bet that you struggle fairly often with actually living that acronym,
I actually do. And
right?
it's a work in progress. And I can say that I've made more progress in the last like year. And it's because, and I think I struggle with that. Like I completely have struggled with faith for my entire life. It's like if I'm trying to think of how to say this. It's like every time like something huge happens in my life or there's a challenge, it's like I blame, there's times where I blame myself, I'll blame God. And it's like, no. But then in the end, I always like, it's because I didn't have the faith I needed to get through this.
So you're saying that you have had a
Yeah.
lot of
And I've had a
repetitions on
lot of
living that.
repetition. Yeah.
You've had a lot of practice. Yeah.
Yep.
So I was thinking the same thing, because just this morning I was having uh I was having a rough morning. I'll just put it that way. I had to get up super, super early for work. I left my house about 5:30 a.m. this morning to go work on a grill in Arctic Circle up in Roy, and had to do a big job up there. And last night, I had gone and I mentioned Chad Hymas before. He's one of my mentors, and I have gone so far as to hire him as my coach. I've paid him thousands of dollars to be like my mentor in this speaking stuff, to really help me with it. And it's been awesome. But I had been hitting a wall of like, I am just like beating my head against a brick wall here. I'm not making the kind of progress that I had been making. I'm just feeling stuck, you know? And so I drove out to his lodge out there and I met with him, and I told him, I was like, hey, I've basically decided that I am going to do this full time within a certain amount of time. I've put a time frame on that, and I've talked to my boss about that. And so I need to replace that income, right? If I'm going to be able to do this full time, that it's something that I feel so called to do, that I feel is like my purpose in life. And I was like, I think I have some paradigms going on in my head, some belief systems that are holding me back with that. And he's like, well, I think I have an idea of probably what some of those are, but let's start with what's the number that we got to reach. So I'm like, what's the vision, right? How much money do you need to make? And we're going to work backwards from there. How much money do you
Hmm.
need to support your family if you're going to transition to this full time? I told him, I was like, I need to make $100,000 in a year to be to replace everything that I have and be able to afford my house and like not be super stressed out,
Hmm.
right? Anything less than that, I'm like getting tight. I'm like, "Grr." So like that's the number. He's like, okay, so your goal, you're here, what you're gonna do now is you're gonna work to where you're making 10 grand a month. So slightly overshooting that, but that's what you're gonna break that down to your month. So how many proposals for speaking do you have to send out in order to land a gig? And if your gig is X amount, we just work the number system. Like, what do we got to do every day to hit that? How many proposals do we have to send out? So we come up with my number, and I was like, you need to send out a minimum of 2 proposals a day. So your goal is going to be 4. See if you can hit 4 if you're doing a Monday through Friday thing. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to get up an hour early every day, and I'm going to just work on kind of some outbound prospecting, trying to connect with people and see if there's some opportunities I can dig up. And that's what I'm going to do. So I come home from that. I'm like, all right, basically I am now, I had been having my mother, who's actually my business partner, handle some of my outbound stuff. And I just been working on the creation side of things for a lot. And I was like, all right, I need to take over doing some outbound stuff. I did that for a career for multiple years in my sales job, but then this morning, as I'm thinking, I had to get up. So I didn't do it this morning, but I had to leave early. But I was thinking about that. I'm like, hey, I'm going to get doing that. But it was stressing me out. and I could not figure out why. I was getting like extremely anxious to the point that I was having some thoughts starting to swirl, like self-harm kind of thoughts. And I
Mm-hmm.
had to stop myself. I'm like, what is happening right now? And I had to kind of go through my own little framework that I had to discover, okay, what are the lies I'm telling myself right now? And what are the wounds that are supporting those lies? So I had the whole drive up there to think, what's the story I'm telling myself in my head right now? And I think I still need to do some more work on this, but the best that I could figure during my commute was that I had been working my freaking butt off in my sales job before work, putting in so much time and so much effort, just grinding. And I had finally got to a point where I was finally making about the right amount of money that I wanted to make. And then my wife passed away and my whole world just blew up. And I tried to get back into sales for like 9 months after that, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't handle it. My mental health was crap. I just fallen apart. I could barely even pick up the phone, and handling rejection was a lot harder at that point for some reason. I didn't have the resilience that I used to have, and so I gave up on that career and I transitioned into trades, and I never really resolved that part of me. So now I'm stepping back into it and having to do the same thing again, but selling myself essentially is what I'm having to do.
Mm-hmm.
And my most recent memory of months and months of trying to do that was absolute hell. And that's the most recent emotional memory that my body has to doing that. So like I learned through the therapy that I went through, I learned through experience that my body remembers my grief and the trauma that I've been through, and it responds in physiological ways. And I learned that as I was starting to get back, okay, I'm going to start doing some of this sales stuff. I'm going to start doing some of this outbound cold outreach and trying to, drum up conversations. Well, all of a sudden that very traumatic time of my life is, whoa, and my body's like I'm starting to like hyperventilate and freak out. And so now, coming back to talk about this, I'm like seeing you talk about the faith thing. I'm like, if he's anything like me, it's not because he's perfect at that. It's because he's had to do it over
Yeah,
and over
and
and
over
over.
again. Yep, it's repetition, man. Like
So that was a long, like roundabout way for me to
Yeah.
kind of tell you the same experience I had today. But yeah, so I have to work my own framework over and over that I teach other people, which also kind of gives you a little bit of imposter syndrome, a little bit, doesn't
yeah.
it? Like how can I go teach somebody else this when I'm the one that
When I'm
struggles
the
with
one
it?
that's dealing with it, yeah.
Yeah,
And then
and I think that's what gives you the credibility is that
and
you have to live it.
I'm to the point now where I want to teach it more. Like I want to put myself more out there, and
Mhm.
I'm struggling at knowing how to do it. Like it's like I don't know where life's
Yeah,
calling me right
when
now,
you go
but
to dude, getting out into speaking and just really putting myself out there more and just trying to really level up, I guess, in that kind of way, doing something drastically bigger, drastically different, and making the jump to that has been, I cannot say it was hard as when I lost my wife. Like the mental work that I had to do there, that
mhm,
is still tip of the spear, but this is not far behind it of the amount of effort that I'm having to
is
put in
involved. Yeah,
mentally to break. I talked about paradigms, the mental boxes that we put ourselves in of who we think we even are and who we think what we think we're capable of and what we believe about this world and how it works, what we believe about God that we've been talking about. Like these are our paradigms. And if you're going to step into something bigger, you're going to step into something different, well, you're stepping out of the boat. You're leaving that paradigm. And that is the hardest thing that I have ever done in my life is break those paradigms. I've done it a couple times, so I know I can do it. And that's why I came up with a framework. Like this is how you break a paradigm
yeah,
and do something completely different. But it's so frustrating that it doesn't make it any easier every
yeah.
time I go to do it.
So what
Oh
we're
boy.
kind of still on the conversation, of God, I have one question for
Yeah,
you for
go for it.
that is so for listeners struggling with belief after tragedy or trauma, where can they begin rebuilding trust in life again? Like how can they find that belief again?
Well, you could go a couple different ways with this, but you specifically mentioned the God thing. If you have listeners that
Yeah.
have at least a Christian belief framework to their life, right? They don't have to be LDS or not. I'll just tell you from my experience, the greatest piece of advice that I ever got, I wish I remember who told it to me. But it was from way earlier in life than my grief. And I just remembered it when I was going through my grief was that the worst thing you could do when you're struggling with your faith in God, or you're struggling with being angry with God, or any of that thing, is to stop talking to him. Even if you absolutely hate his guts, or you hate the idea of him, or you're like, because when you're super angry with him, I think people convince themselves that he doesn't exist. Their whole life they believed in him, but they choose to, rather than work on why they're angry, it's easier to just say, you know what, he doesn't actually exist, so I don't have to address that relationship. I don't have to put in the work to work on that relationship, because it's easier to just cut it off. And I'm just going to pretend it doesn't exist, right? So I will take credit for myself. Again, we talked about the humility thing, right? I'm not putting myself above anybody, but I am taking credit where I put in some work. I never stopped talking to him. However, for a long time, the only thing I could do was yell at him. And I specifically told him multiple times in prayers, like, I don't want you to do anything for me, which was probably dumb of me to say. But I was basically like telling him, like, I want you to leave me the frick alone. I'm just telling you how I feel. And if you are who you say you are, then you can help me with these feelings. And so I'm giving you my feelings, and you can do whatever you want with them. Good night. And then I'd leave it at that, and that was kind of the routine for a little while. And I was an angry, bitter person, but because I was still having those conversations, I was at least opening myself to having experiences with God. Eventually I started having more experiences with God. And then when I was able to get to the point where I had finally had enough and allowed him back in to whatever degree I would allow him, he would take that opportunity and I would feel it. And then that would remind me, I'm like, okay, I really freaking hate his plan, but he knows what he's doing, because I feel it. I feel the progress is being made. I feel something here. I have no idea what it looks like, but because I can feel the progress, I at least trust in that. And that's the only thing that I had to go on for a while, was that I just felt intrinsically somehow that he was still there with me in the pit, and he was kind of climbing out of it with me. He wasn't above me pulling me out. It was more like he was walking with me and letting me kind of take steps and figure it out, but just helping me to be able to take those steps. You know what I mean? So I don't think my life has had a specific path. Like, I don't think it was necessarily authored exactly how my life would go. I think because of some scriptures I read in the Bible, like Jeremiah 1:5, for example, before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. That one was a big one for me more recently, of like, I believe because of scriptures like that I had a relationship with God before I came here. And because of that, I knew how this life would go, at least in a generality. I knew that it was going to suck in a lot of ways. And I might have even known some specific details about some of the really big pivot points that I would experience, like losing my wife. I personally believe, because of some personal experience that I've had, that I agreed to at least that experience. Now, the things that have happened since then, I think, you can do what you will with those, and you kind of co-author your life with God as you go through it. But that's the best answer I can give you for that, is you
No,
can't stop talking to him, even if
I
all you
think
can do
that's,
is yell at him.
dude, I think there's so many like similarities, like with the way that we think. Like it's like I've had similar experiences to where like I was like still trying to pray and you know still speaking to God, but saying like, you know what, like I don't know why I'm talking to you. Like I don't feel anything right now.
I just don't know what else to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But I always go back to I'll bring in a scripture really quick if that's okay.
Yep.
Matthew seventeen
At this
twenty.
point, no, we're not talking about that.
Matthew 17:20, and Jesus said unto them, because of your unbelief, for verily I say unto you, if ye have faith as grain of a mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. That's one of my favorite ones, is because it taught me that if I have just that little bit of faith, I can move forward in life and get through anything. Like it doesn't take much.
Yeah. In the business world, or in the professional personal development world, you hear a term sometimes used called a quantum leap. Someone makes a quantum leap in life and business. It's making such a radically big, different change in their life that brings exponential results. And usually they're talking about in a financial sense, right? Like making a ton more money. But that can also apply to plenty of other things. And that's like the process of how to do a quantum leap in life is laid out in the scriptures. That's exactly what he's talking about. You don't have to have some massive faith, because all faith is acting when you have no proof that it's going to work. Like there's no other reason than the feeling in your soul that you should do this. That's why, like, if you go to make a quantum leap in life, everybody's going to think you are absolutely nuts. Because they're like, why would you ever think that that's going to work? Like, I can't explain it to you. I've thought about it, and I just feel it in my soul. And I just feel like this pull to go do this. And then you step out of the boat. You have faith as grain of a little mustard seed, but you can tell that mountain to move, because it's the actual movement of the faith. It's the actual action that makes the miracles happen.
Yeah, you're taking that leap.
Like think of the woman with the issue of the blood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she touched the hem of Jesus' garment. Whose idea was that? Whose idea was it for her to be healed in that manner?
Well, I personally would think it would be. What am I thinking? Would it be
It was the woman's
for
idea.
herself? Yeah, because she's
It was
the
her
one
idea.
she's the one who
Because
had the faith
even
to
after
go
she
do it.
touched
Yeah.
him, what did Jesus say after she touched him? Who touched me? He stopped the whole throng of people. Because the story is they were actually going to Jairus' house to raise his daughter. They were on their way to go do that. And there were all these people that are like, Jesus is going to raise this person from the dead or something, or heal her. And so there's a whole bunch of people following, like throngs of people all over the place, bumping into each other. And then this woman says, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, then I will be healed. She came up with that on her own. Now, you could argue probably the Spirit had some influence with that or some other things, but from her perspective, it was her idea. And she goes and she does it. And then Jesus says, thy faith has made thee whole, right? Think of one of my other favorite stories is the centurion, the Roman centurion who had his son healed from across town. Remember that one?
I don't remember that one.
He goes to Jesus and he says, my son is sick and I know that you can heal him. And Jesus is like, good, take me to him. And the centurion says, I am not worthy to have you enter my house. I am a sinner, all these other things. You cannot come to my house. I know that if you just say the word, by the time I get home, he'll be healed. And Jesus kind of steps back. He's like, dude, and he turns to his disciples. He's like, this man, not even a Jew, has greater faith than anyone that I have met in this entire city. And then he turns around back to him and says, it is done even as you have said, go. And centurion goes home and his son's healed when he gets there. So that's another one. Like, whose idea was it for the miracle to happen the way that it happened? Jesus even suggested a different way. And the dude's like, nah, I'd rather it happen like
rather
this.
it happen this way, yeah.
And Jesus is like, done. Cool. Awesome. So that's why, like, I talk about the drive from, I talk about all these things about creating success the way that you want it to look. That's how you co-create miracles with God. You get a vision for how you want it to happen. You're going to have a feeling that I should go this particular direction, but the how you're going to get there is completely up to you. And a lot of times when we're looking for miracles, we're asking God, like, please fix this or please do something. And the only real missing piece is we just haven't told God how we would like it to be done and then go act like it's going to happen that way. Think of Moses when he split the Red Sea. If you go back and read that story, God never tells him, go split the Red Sea. Not once those words come. All it does is he says, hey, obviously you need to go gather the Israelites, right? And you need to leave. So he goes and does that. He never tells them where they're going to go. He just says, I have a place prepared for you. That's all he says, right? So how many times do we pray and we get kind of a peace like, it's going to work out. I have a place prepared for you. But you're like, okay, cool. How are we going to get there? And crickets.
So that's my problem is it's like my wife will tell me this all the time. She's like, you just need to believe. Like, and it's like, if things don't go a certain way within a certain time frame and I don't see it, that's when I just start losing myself.
Well, I mean, think of, because the Israelites had the same thing. Since we're talking about Moses, when they said go that way, that's basically all the Lord said was go that way, and he went before him and they followed him. Well, that way's a dead end, bro. That way's
Mm-hmm.
the Red Sea. And if the Egyptians have decided they're going to come kill all of you, going straight to the largest body of water in the
Water.
region is a bad idea, right? That's a death sentence. You're just going to get trapped there. But they go there anyways because that's where the Lord says to go. Then they get there, and the Lord doesn't even tell them what's going to happen. All the Israelites start murmuring. They're like, great, Moses, you've led us to our death. What are we going to do? And Moses is like, that's a really good question. I don't even know. And so the Lord drops a pillar of fire, blocks off the Egyptians so that now they're stuck between this wall of fire and the Red Sea with the Egyptians on this side and drowning to death on this side. And he doesn't tell them anything. He just stops it and lets them sit there and think about it. And then Moses goes out to the water and prays. And the only thing the Lord says was, with this staff, you will do my wonders. So then Moses is like, I have an idea.
He just
Splits
parts.
the
Yeah.
Red Sea. And I totally believe that if the vision in his head was instead that we're going to lift the earth from under the sea and make a land bridge, and we're going to walk across on dry ground on top of the water, like, why not? Why would that not work? That would work just fine. I think that's totally how it would happen. But no, Moses is like, you know what? We're going to split the sea in half. We're going to walk through on the bottom. Cool. Accomplishes the same purpose. I don't think it matters to the Lord how it's done as long as you get there.
As long as you get
How
there,
you
yeah.
get there is up to you. And you just tell him, this is what I'm going to do. And unless you tell me something different, I'm just going. And I found when I pray that way and I come up with a plan on my own, I study it out in my own mind and I take it to him and I'm like, hey, is this right? Because this is what I'm going to do. And if I don't get any feedback from you, I'm just going to assume that's permission to move forward and I'm just going to go until you tell me otherwise. And then when I behave that way, I get course corrected often, right? And usually the course correction isn't a no, this is wrong. It's a, hey, this might actually be a little bit better if you did it this way, if you made this little pivot, right? And then I just get these little pivot course corrections. And every once in a while I get a hard stop, like, no, that's a bad idea. Maybe you should think of something else. But that's more rare, right? Usually it's, if I'm studying out of my mind and I'm kind of going with my feelings, I come up with a decent idea. God just has a slightly better version of that same idea.
Yeah. So there is one thing, or maybe two, that we have not touched. And we're sitting at about an hour and 20-ish minutes. But
Yeah, let's do it.
let's do it. Let's do it. So one thing that was mentioned when I introduced you was music. And I just want to
we
know,
haven't
like,
talked about that at all.
how songwriting has, played a role in your healing.
In my healing, that's an interesting way to think about it because I haven't even thought about it that way. But one of the songs definitely was, because one of the songs that I wrote tells a story of how I made some progress in my relationship with God, even just this past year. I was about in May. So I've got a story for everything, if you can't tell.
I love it.
I
think it's great.
I was up at a men's retreat and by an organization called Warrior Heart, which I highly recommend you check that out. Do you know who Kurt Frankham is?
I don't think I've
Kurt
heard the name
Frankham runs a
before.
podcast called Leading Saints. It's
Okay, I've
church
heard.
leadership.
I remember. I've heard of a podcast called Leading Saints.
Okay, so the guy that runs that, his name's Kurt Frankham. Yeah, and Kurt Frankham's on the board for Warrior Heart, along with some other friends of mine. And they do this Christian men's retreat based off of a book called Wild at Heart, which is a Christian book written by a guy named John Eldredge. And some of the things that I talk about in the book that I wrote, that's another thing we haven't even talked about, was my book.
That's the other way I was going too after this.
But yeah, there's a whole other thing about that. We could do 3 episodes, man.
Yeah.
But when I was up there, I went up to this men's retreat based off of a recommendation of a friend. And he said, hey, I think you'll get some clarity about what you should do with your speaking career. And we were like, what you want to do if you go up to this and just separate from all the distractions and go spend some time in the mountains, just you and God in a journal. That's basically what this retreat is. And it's very mental health, but also spiritual health relationship with God based, kind of both hand in hand. And all the guys that are giving sessions up there for the whole, I guess, what is the word I'm looking for? The whole group of guys that are up there, the whole audience up there, there's like 150, 200 of us up there. All the guys giving sessions, most of them are clinical therapists that work with different providers somewhere here in Utah. but all coming from a Christian background. Because we're in Utah, a good number of them are LDS folk, and then a good number of them aren't. But there's this one particular session that this guy gave about fatherlessness and how us as men all have a fatherlessness wound that we need to address. Even if we had the most amazing fathers on the planet Earth, they still fall short of God. And whatever that gap is gap that we have to forgive our father on earth, our dad here, for falling short of. And so they're kind of talking about that particular principle. And it made sense to me logically, but I did not relate with it in my heart because I realized that my fatherlessness wound that I had was actually with God. And that I felt like my dad was a better dad than God was. And I never realized that. This whole time that I had been writing my book, that I've been trying to build a speaking career and get my name out there and pushing really hard on that, there had been an overarching frustration with God about the whole process in general. Because as I mentioned before, I had reached a point in my career where I had finally kind of made my goals and was kind of comfortable. And I'm like, I'm good with my life being this way. And then I have this experience out of nowhere that tells me, nope, I'm going to take a hard right turn and start doing this. I was very frustrated that I had finally got my life to a point where I was comfortable. Again, it took me 6 years to get there again. But the moment I do, God says, nope, yoink, and pulls that away and says, you're going to go do this. And there was are you freaking kidding me? Like, can you just leave me alone and let me be happy? And I didn't realize that was going on in my head so much until I got up there and they talked about this fatherlessness one. And I had this like epiphany. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have some issues with you still that we need to talk about. So then after the sessions, nobody's allowed to talk for like an hour. You just go out by the campfires, you go out in the trees. It's just you and your journal and God. And the only people that can talk is there's some people with a neon armband that are part of the prayer team. And if you need somebody to pray with, you go grab one of them. But other than that, it's pretty much silent. And so I go out during this kind of vow of silence, they call it. And I start talking to God, basically saying like, you know what? I just realized that I view you as an abusive father. You have kicked the living crap out of me. And I don't feel like I did anything to deserve the crap that you've put me through. And I just kind of, all these feelings and thoughts had been buried so deep in me that I hadn't even really realized they were there, just all started pouring out. And I finally got all of that out and kind of gave God a chance to get a word in there. And it felt so good to get all that out. It was heavy, but it was like I was crying, I was bawling my eyes out. And then the Spirit hit me like a freight train, and the words, "You asked me for this," hit my mind. Not in the sense of like, shut up, you deserve this kind of a thing. It was more like that scripture I mentioned, Jeremiah 1:5, they actually used that in the presentation before I formed the belly, I knew thee. So that scripture was already kind of bounced around in my head. And so from that kind of perspective that you asked me for this was where I was like, oh my gosh, I knew that this was going to happen. That was that experience that I had. And I was like, geez, oh my goodness, this isn't God punishing me and turning me into a tool that I don't even want to be. And being some kind of drill sergeant, just like, this is how it's going to go, whether you like it or not, This is him in his mercy allowing me to experience the things that I needed to experience so that I could become the person that I told him I wanted to be. Which is probably hard for him to watch, but he's got to let me go through it because that's what I wanted. I wanted to become whatever I am later, and this is what the opportunities that I had to have so that I could build myself into that with his help. And so then, I kind of have this just changed my whole perspective on the freaking universe. Like this is another big paradigm shift that I just had in this moment. And they ring this big bell and say, hey, the next session's about to start. So I don't realize I've been out there for 45 minutes, bawling my eyes already. And I start walking back to the barn where they have this session. And I'm kind of done. I'm just kind of trying to gather myself again and take a breath. And then the Spirit hits me again. And the words was, it's time to write your song. And I was like, hold the front door. What? I had been having some feelings that I needed to incorporate music with my speaking in some way because singing has been a big part of my life as a kid and stuff. I did show choir in high school and I did mostly like singing in church kind of things, but I still really enjoyed it. But as I had been writing my book, I kept getting these little feelings that I needed to allow music to be a part of that. And that always scared me. And I was like, later. We'll talk, we'll think about that later. But it finally came down. It's like, it's time to write your song. I'm like, okay, you said to be willing to sing. You never said anything about writing music. What is this writing music crap? And I didn't know anybody that wrote music. I had no idea where to go with that. So then I go into the next session with, now my thoughts are, how the freak am I going to start writing music going on in my head as I go into the next session? The guy that gets up on the stage as like this kind of little intermission, he's got a guitar. He says, "Hey guys, my name's Steve. So-and-so asked me to write a song for this retreat. Here it is." And he sings this song. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. That's the guy I need to talk to. Obviously, it was like, boom, like here it is, just set right in front of me. And he was the guy that taught me kind of the thought process to go through for writing music. And I've got 4 songs now written and kind of halfway produced. I did them in studio. They don't sound as good as what you'd hear on the radio, but they're close, and I sing them as part of the keynotes. And then I eventually wrote one song called "You Asked Me for This." And that was the 4th song that I wrote, which is me retelling that story that I just told you. And that song, when I wrote that, I wasn't planning on that. I was driving to work one day. I was actually driving out to, I was coming from Tooele. I was going to Walmart in Pleasant Grove to work on a piece of equipment out there. And I was coming through like Eagle Mountain area.
Yeah.
And I was having lyrics going through my head and I couldn't stop them. Like, what the heck? So I was using ChatGPT with the voice. And I was like telling it what to write, and it came so fast. And then I used an AI program called Suno to put some music to it. And I had the whole rough demo done in about an hour, and it was out. And I was like, this is my favorite so far. This is nuts. And all the other 3 songs I wrote took me a couple of weeks to really come up with and to get dialed in to where I was like halfway satisfied with it. That one, I was like, there's nothing I would change about this in an hour. So then over the next couple of hours as I was working, I'm like, why did that come so fast? That was crazy. And then I got a very strong prompting that a particular family member of mine had just had a stillborn baby, had lost a child. And I felt very strongly I needed to send that person this song. You asked me for this. So when I got that prompting, I was like, put on the brakes here. You want me to go tell this person that just lost a child that they asked for that? Are you crazy? No. Sorry. No, I'm not doing that. I'm going to veto that one. But it wouldn't leave me. So for an hour, it was just eating me up inside. And so I finally called this particular family member and I told him, you can hate my guts if you want. I'm sorry, but I wrote this song. It came today. I don't really know why. It's not even about you and your situation. It's about mine. But apparently you need to hear it. So I'm sending you the audio file. Punch me in the face later if you want, but here it is. And just kind of left it at that. And then waited the whole rest of the day. I was like biting my fingernails and stuff. And they finally sent me a text that night, like, big long paragraph. And I'm expecting to get chewed out, but it was like, that's exactly what I needed to hear. Those were the thoughts I was already having. I'm printing these lyrics out, putting them in a memorial box with the baby, all this kind of stuff. So that's how it's been. That's been the experience with the music. And now when I go speak, I bring that music with, and depending on what the situation is, I'll sing this or I'll sing that one. And it's a key part of what I do now.
So cool. You have so many like different aspects that I feel like
I know.
You could take pieces of everything, like you said, and have like 3 to 4 different episodes here.
I know. Like, obviously I could talk a lot, right? So
The last thing here, I want to hear about your book. I know this is a lot of topics that we've covered tonight.
I'll keep this one short. I promise.
No, you're good. You're good. I'm enjoying this.
Yeah. So the book is called The Overhaul: Fixing Your Mindset and Driving Success. And if I had any type of a marketing mind, I would have a copy like sitting behind me or something, but I don't. I've given them all away. I need to order some more, but you can get it on Amazon. That's the title: The Overhaul: Fixing Your Mindset, Driving Success. And the book was the very first thing that I did when I decided, like, I have to do this sharing my story thing. I have to do this speaking thing, whatever that even means, I was like, well, I don't even know how to communicate what I'm so passionate about coaching these guys at work and the other people that I work with. So I'm just going to write a book. And that's what kind of forced me to really nail down my material and nail down how I teach it, and some of the stories that I use and the analogies that I use. So I wrote it more for me than I wrote it for anybody else. It was my way of how do I how do I teach this to myself so that somebody else could actually understand it? And so the book uses it's really broken down into 3 sections, and I name those 3 sections: ignition, the shift, and launch. Ignition is some of what I need people to understand about how this world works, like some science stuff, so they understand how I'm teaching it in the middle part of the book, where I call it the shift. And the shift is like, we're going to change the way that you think about everything. And now that you understand kind of where I'm coming from a science and also a faith-based background, now I'm going to teach you how to change the way that you think. Now, now that we're going over the drive framework is really the meat right in the middle. That's the shift. Once I get done with the drive framework, and I've taught that in multiple chapters, then I go into launch and like, okay, well now here's what you do with it and go, right? And I leave people like, ready, set, just run. This, if you understand this is how the world works, and this is how, in my opinion, faith works, and what the scriptures tell us, and this is the framework of what I teach on how to actually apply that. Now, here's some guidelines to actually applying it. That's basically it. That's the book.
That's
How do
really
you
cool.
overhaul your life? From my perspective.
You have so many things going on that it's awesome. Like I love what you're doing with like the framework that you're teaching. Love what you're doing with I love you, bro. Like it's so thank you
Yeah,
for
I have to be
sharing
careful not
everything.
to like get too involved in too many things, and I don't have any time.
No, it's
Like one of the
understandable.
other things I'm working on now is because I feel so passionate about like mentoring young adults and stuff, is putting together a virtual mastermind mentoring community for young adults that are trying to figure out what the heck to do with their careers. And how do we
Yeah.
how do we jump off this cliff and make sure that we don't die on the way down? You know, and so I just got a email today from the guy that's handling the back end of my systems and doing some of my web building. He says, "Hey, I just finished the landing page for your new mentoring community offer. So now I get to go
Nice.
tweak a couple of things and actually start mentioning that to people."
Nice. That's really cool. Kind of like a kind of coaching type stuff, coaching, mentoring. Is it
Yeah,
following
it's
that line?
it's gonna be cheap because I was like, dude, college kids are broke. They're
Yeah.
not gonna go pay
Tons of
thousands of
money. Yeah.
dollars to have a one-on-one coach, unless maybe mommy pays for it.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that came out was I was doing a couple of jobs over in Utah County again at a Super Chicks, and I asked them, I says, "Hey, if the restaurant across the street offered you $1 more an hour, would you go?" They're like, "Oh yeah, I'd be gone." I'm like, okay, just a thought. If you were interviewing between these two places and this one place offered you $11 an hour, but then the place you're at now offers you $10 an hour, but they say once a month we're going to have our corporate leaders come to the store, and just for an hour you can pick their brains and ask them whatever questions you want about how they got to where they are in life. Which one would you choose? They're like, ooh, actually, okay, in that scenario,
This
I would
says, yeah,
choose the dollar less an hour and have that. So I'm like, okay, that tells me something. And then I asked the same questions to some other restaurants that I was fixing stuff in, asking those kids if they would do the same thing. And 95% of them said that, yeah, they would do that. I'm like, if I put that together and it was $50 a month, would you do it? And like 70% of them said yes.
nice.
So I was like, all right, I guess that's good marketing like research for me. So I'm just going to put that together. So now when I go to a job, I'm just going to have the same conversation, then just be like, hey, here's this, like, come do it. I'm just going to have the
Mm-hmm.
people that have mentored me, have other people, just come do maybe like a podcast style, like interview, and where people can hop on and just type questions in the chat that they answer,
Yeah.
or, whatever. Like, hey, $50 a month, and we'll just have these people that make millions of dollars just show up, and you can pick their brains. Like, I would have paid for that. I'm kind of
Yeah,
jealous
for
that
sure.
I'm
Because it's
like
like,
creating something that I never had. That
yeah,
would have been awesome.
for that guidance and people who've already been there. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the next cool little side project that I'm working on.
Yeah. You're pretty busy.
Yeah, I have a lot. That was one of the things when I went out and talked to Chad about my mentoring and figured it out. Is he's like, you got to put out a couple of fires. You need to focus on like the things to get those going first, and then go and do some other stuff.
Yeah. My wife was like, I usually last year I was recording twice a week and I work full time during the day. My wife's like, well, this coming year, I only want you to do it once a week because twice a week is getting a little rough with the kids and stuff. We have 3 young kids. And
But yeah, I got
so now
3
it's
too,
like,
and my wife's pregnant now, so we got a fourth on the way. So
yep, so do we.
I
So do
feel
we.
that. How far is your wife along now?
We're due in May.
My wife will be due in, I think we're August. So we're just a little
Okay.
bit behind you.
Yeah.
But she's in the throes of the sickness of the first
Sickness. Yep.
trimester.
Yep. We just got over that for the most part.
Good. Good for you. We're
You're
awaiting
getting
that
there.
now.
Well,
Yeah.
best of luck to you. So one last question here, and I just love to get like kind of just a general feel for this because everybody's answer is pretty different.
Okay.
It's just a easy question. I guess I should say more of a generalized question. What do you feel is the biggest stigma when it comes to mental health?
Biggest stigma? Well, there's a few out there. So let me chew on this for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll tell you from my experience with the I Love You Bro project and talking to men just about every week about it, that one of the biggest stigmas is probably one of the classic masculine stigmas around mental health is that if you need that help, that it's a weakness in some way, right? That admitting to somebody that you're broken to one degree or another is somehow admitting that you're less valuable, which is not true, right? That you're something wrong with you from a value proposition standpoint, I guess, where you say, is there something wrong with me? I'm like, dude, there's crap wrong with me. Yeah, there's gonna be some stuff wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, we're not in heaven yet, so yes, there's gonna be some stuff wrong with you. But just the way that it's thought about by men in general is we still have a lot of work to do in that regard, to where we can convince men that admitting that they have some mental health things that they need to work on is not synonymous with admitting that you're less valuable, that you don't offer as much to your family, that you don't offer as much to those that love you and to your community and to your friends. And that telling your family that you're going to a men's support group is somehow like only people that have issues and are like pedophiles or like doing some terrible stuff go to support groups. Like there's still a stigma around the type of people that go to support groups that is not true. They think that you're going to a loony bin or something, and you're gonna come out like, if you're gonna go hang out with crazy people, then how are you gonna come out of that? People are gonna convince you that you need drugs or something like that. So
Awesome.
yeah, I think that's it. That admitting you have mental health struggles is normal, and talking to people about it should not be weird.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things I struggled with is actually admitting that I had a problem because I was so afraid of what everybody would think about me. So, but now it's like I've learned I don't care.
Yeah,
I don't care what you think about me because I'm gonna do what I want to do, regardless if you approve or not.
I think it's also interesting, and I have a feeling you'll probably agree with me on this, is that a lot of men say that they don't care what people think about them,
Yeah, a
but
lot of men do.
you can tell that they're full of crap.
Yes,
When
yes, I totally
like,
agree.
you look them in the eye, you're like, when me or you, I get the feeling like when I look at you and you say that I don't care, like, I don't feel a disconnect there.
Yeah,
But when a lot of other men say, like, I don't care what you think about me, like, I don't believe you. I can't put a pin on exactly how you said it that makes me not believe you, but there's something in the way that that's communicated that is
yeah.
inauthentic, and I have a whole theory on why we can pick up some stuff on that, which is going to require another hour-long episode. When you finally own your own stuff and you say, like, yeah, I have some issues with mental health that I have to work on, and I am owning that, and I am proud that I put my value in my willingness to put
Mhm.
in the work rather than the way that I look to other people,
Yeah,
right? And I know that I have more value because I am humbling myself in the way that I'm putting myself on even plane with everybody, realizing that it doesn't matter what other people think about me. That has no bearing on how well I'm able to provide for my family. And that has no bearing on how well I'm able to do my job or this, that, or the other, right? It's literally just a self image thing. And when I can figure out that I can control my self image then all of a sudden the world just opens up. Like I can do anything. And it's when people have made that connection, and they have to make that connection all the time because, like I
Hmm.
said, sometimes we waver and we come back. But when somebody can actually stand on their own 2 feet and authentically say, I don't care what you think about me, you feel that. And it's not in like this. I think a big piece of it is that it's not said with bravado, right? I think too many men put on this kind of macho mask when they say that I don't care what you think about me, and it's said with like I don't care what you think about me, like, yeah.
Yeah,
I can look at you and just very peacefully say, like, what you think about me has no bearing on my
mhm.
self-worth, right?
And it's for me, it's like been a way big work in progress. And I think this podcast has actually helped me do it because I had to learn how to be vulnerable, like what I'm telling people and things I'm saying. And I was for the longest time, and I've been afraid of like, oh, if I say this certain thing or tell a specific story, I'm going to hurt somebody's feelings. But more and more, like I talk to people and have guests on and whatever I'm doing, like actually, I really don't care because it's like if I say something and I hurt your feelings, that's not my intention, and it's most likely on you. Like
It's most
what?
likely because you have a wound
Yep,
around that topic that you haven't addressed yet,
exactly, exactly,
and that's on you.
exactly, and that's how I've had to start viewing it. But that's a whole conversation on it, a different day
I
that we
say there's
could.
episode 4 now, right?
Yep. All right. So well, let me start with this question. Where can people find you?
westonbrandon.com, pretty easy. I'm most active on Facebook out of all of the social medias I have. Instagram has gotten bigger since I've had a couple of reels kind of blow up, but also for not great reasons. There's a lot of angry people that really
Social
hate
media.
that I remarried, So I get a lot more views now, but the number of followers hasn't increased to match the more views because a lot of the people are not happy with that. But then I get lots of good stuff too. So I still post actively on those, but for the most engagement, having conversations, I usually do that on Facebook and Instagram the most. I'm on TikTok as well, but yeah, that's where you'd find me.
And last thing here is we covered a lot of topics. And I think more than I probably usually cover. But I'm the type I
You
want
might
to.
have to do
Uh,
a part 1 and part 2 when you publish it.
I want to like make sure I get everything in there for some reason. It's just who I am, I guess. But is there anything that we did not discuss that you would like to bring up?
I don't think so. I think at some point, each of my little branches of what I do has been mentioned. The biggest thing that my biggest priority that I am working on right now is speaking in more schools. The Drive framework has turned into what's called the Drive Success System, which since we were talking about breaking paradigms and we talked about, those issues with our youth and our young adults
Hmm.
and those beliefs that they have about themselves, I've created that system to intentionally break those belief systems. The problem with those belief systems, though, is that they were instilled through a lot of repetition, right? Interpreting the story a certain way multiple times over a long period of time. And it takes repetition to rewrite the story about yourself. So just doing an assembly, just doing one speech doesn't cut it. That doesn't happen in that way. That can inspire you and make you think differently for a short amount of time, but then the deeper ingrained beliefs come right back. So I've got a student journaling system as part of that the students do every week for the entire school year. This came actually out of working with some school counselors and a superintendent up in Idaho of a really rural school district that hired me to go help students become proud of where they're from is what they originally asked me to do. And I'm like, okay, there's something else going on underneath that. Like, why are you asking me that specific of a question? Like, why are you concerned that they're not proud of where they're coming from? They're like, well, because these issues and these issues and these issues. And I'm like, it sounds like this is probably going on. Like, I had a pretty good idea. I was like, how about I ask the students some questions and see if I can come up with some deeper answers? And I found the answers I was expecting and presented them to the school. And I presented them with a plan on how we can rewrite those beliefs and actually accomplish lasting change. That's where the journals came from. And now it's the Drive Success System that I pitch to schools. It's pretty cool. That's the
Yes,
thing that I'm most proud of right now that I'm really trying to push. So if I was going to say anything, that would be what I'd mention.
that's really cool. Well, Weston, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time away from your night to be on my show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Went longer, I think, than either of
Yeah,
us planned, but
yeah,
it went by
yeah,
fast. That's
yeah,
when we have
yeah.
fun.
It's that's how I usually roll when I'm in good conversation. So
Cool.
thank
Well, if I'm hanging out in Saratoga Springs and I'm bored and I need somebody to eat dinner with, maybe I'll shoot you an email or something.
you should do it. You should do it. The invite's there. So thank you to everyone who's listening tonight. Please, if this resonates with you at all, please subscribe and share. Thanks again. Until next time.